Thursday's planned launch of the space shuttle Endeavour. As a cloud system approached the launch site Wednesday, forecasters described conditions as a crapshoot. The mission to begin construction of an international space station will involve a rendezvous with a Russian power module. It is so tightly choreographed that there is only a 10-minute launch window each day. Our coverage begins Thursday at the times you can see on your screen.
But what happens next is uncertain. The third component, the Russian-built service module, has not been finished. It will provide the living space for the first crew for the International Space Station. Its launch is planned for the middle of next year. But there are problems. Construction of the station is over budget and late. Russia has had difficulty keeping up with its commitment, which is nearly half of the station's modules. The United States has committed hundreds of millions of dollars to help the Russians meet their goals. The Zarya module was a year late when it was launched last month.
I think we put the slips to good use. You just come up with new challenges, come up with ways to focus people's attention.
NASA says the Russian experience aboard the Mir station is invaluable to the project, and says without Russia, the project would be delayed for years and cost an additional $2 billion to complete. And this programming note for you, CNN will provide live coverage of the launch of the Unity module aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour. Our coverage begins at 8:45 GMT Thursday.
Endeavour scheduled for just under 10 hours from now. Standing by with the latest from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, CNN's Miles O'Brien.
Bernie, the chief weather officer for the Space Shuttle program, says it's a crapshoot whether the Space Shuttle Endeavour will begin the first assembly mission of the International Space Station on time. Let's go out to launch pad 39A, about 3 miles over my shoulder, where the Space Shuttle Endeavour is poised and ready for a liftoff at 3:56 a.m. Eastern Time, a little less than 10 hours from now. The weather conditions here right now are perfectly fine, but there is some concern that some clouds and some rain will come in from offshore, causing some difficulty for the shuttle. The shuttle can't fly through rain clouds on its way up to orbit, and the shuttle is, they're very concerned about any lightning which might appear within 10 miles of the launch facility. Also of concern are the abort landing sites on the other side of the ocean in Morocco and Spain. Earlier, the weather forecast for those sites was marginal. Now, what complicates matters even more for NASA is they only have a 10-minute window to launch because the Endeavour is attempting to rendezvous with the first Russian piece of the International Space Station, the Zarya, which was launched into orbit about 2 weeks ago.
She fascinated the people in her own time, and she was seen as a model for young women. That's part, I think, of why we still care, because we're still fascinated with her.
The Air and Space Museum's Tom Crouch has heard lots of theories about what happened to Amelia Earhart, the celebrated aviatrix who disappeared along with her navigator over the South Pacific on July 2nd, 1937. Now there's a new theory that bones measured by the British on a small atoll nearly 60 years ago represent the proof that Earhart's final flight and life ended on a place called Nikumaroro.
And with the better techniques available today, we can see that there is not only a likelihood, but a probability that it was a person more or less of Earhart's description.
The bones in question are nowhere to be found, but the recently re-evaluated measurements of those bones suggest a tall northern European woman. And back then, there were no recorded female inhabitants of Nikumaroro. Now, if the researchers could just find one of those bones.
All we need is one to do a mitochondrial DNA match, and then we'd know.
If you find one of those, clearly that's a smoking gun.
The next step, yet another canvas of Nikumaroro. More detective work for those who would solve the mystery. Rick Lockridge, CNN.
Sternzeit 512,98. Ankunft der Enterprise und ihrer Besatzung auf dem Messegelände Düsseldorf. In Schale haben sie sich geworfen, die Trekkies, denn schließlich geht's ja gleich per Transporter an Bord ihrer Enterprise. Ein bisschen ruckeln, ein bisschen flackern und schon ist man unterwegs. Auf dem Schiff stoßen fleißige Serienfans schon bald auf einen alten Bekannten. Der notorische TV-Bösewicht hat zwar gerade noch über die primitive Technik gelästert, ist in Wahrheit aber davon schwer beeindruckt. Ich habe bisherige Ausstellungen nicht gesehen, aber mein Eindruck ist sehr positiv. Die Kulisse ist ganz anders als im Studio. Doch nicht nur Q hatte Gelegenheit, sich ein Bild von der Technik des 24. Jahrhunderts zu machen. 2.500 Fans wollten gleich in der ersten Stunde der Star Trek World Tour den Warp-Antrieb bestaunen oder einfach mal nur die Brücke betreten. Nach einer knappen Stunde war der Ausflug in die Zukunft allerdings auch schon wieder vorbei. Und die Trekkies wussten nicht so recht, ob sie nun begeistert oder enttäuscht sein sollten.
Von der Kulisse her fand ich, ist die Illusion eigentlich recht schön gemacht.
Von den Effekten war das nicht so dolle. Ja, also alles sehr, sehr plastikhaft.
Bis zu 45 Mark kostet ein Rundgang. Sicherlich kein Pappenstiel. Aber schließlich müssen ja auch Aliens von irgendetwas leben.
US Vice President Al Gore's father has died. A statement from the Vice President's office says Al Gore Sr. died at home of natural causes on Saturday. He was 90 years old. CNN's Bruce Morton has more.
The father, sometime fiddler, 14 years in the House, 18 in the Senate, was probably a more natural politician than the son. Even during his son's 1992 campaign, nobody called Albert Gore Sr. wooden. This snapshot is from his first Senate campaign. The little boy is Al Jr. Gore Sr. was a Southern senator, but an independent one. Pro-civil rights, wouldn't sign the segregationist Southern Manifesto in 1956.
Gore did as much as anybody to alter the whole mindset of the public and enable the civil rights revolution to take place.
And he opposed the Vietnam War when few in the South did. His son served in the Army, but also opposed the war.
In many ways, the model that we'll have of Albert Gore Sr. is somebody who pushed ahead with what he believed in no matter what the cost, because the cause was something that was important to him and that was right.
There was a cost. Gone Washington, critics said, out of touch with Tennessee, with the folks back home in Carthage. Gore countered with an ad that showed him on a white horse, riding with his son.
I may have run ahead of the pack sometimes, he says, but I'm usually headed in the right direction.
Tennessee disagreed and elected Republican William Brock. Gore looked forward.
I had a long and successful career in public life, but when that ended, I didn't think the world had ended.
He went into business, he taught, and he was surprised and happy when his son phoned to say,
"Our congressman has just announced he will not run for Congress again, and I'm running." Both of us were speechless. I finally got around saying, "Well, son, I'll vote for you."
He always wanted a campaign when Gore Jr. ran for president in 1988.
I'm Senator Gore. My son, Senator Al Gore, is a candidate for president.
I know he is.
And I'm for him.
Or when Bill Clinton picked Gore as a running mate in 1992.
I think he's going to achieve something which I was unable to achieve.
Gore had a shot at the vice presidential nomination in 1956, and sometimes even...
A long time ago, I looked in the mirror a few times and thought I might be seeing a president. I enjoyed the hallucination.
But he didn't seem to miss it. Enjoyed watching a grandson play baseball. Enjoyed watching his son's success. A politician of the old good school from a time when politics was honorable work.
Morgen ist von der europäischen Raumfahrtbasis Kourou in Französisch-Guayana zum 10. Mal in diesem Jahr eine Ariane-Rakete gestartet. Sie bringt den mexikanischen Telekommunikationssatelliten SatMex 5 ins All. Über ihn sollen Fernsehprogramme für Mexiko, die USA und Südamerika ausgestrahlt werden. Probleme mit dem Satelliten hatten den Start um 24 Stunden verzögert. Den mexikanischen Telekommunikationssatelliten SatMex 5 ins All. Er soll Programme für Mexiko, die USA und Südamerika ausstrahlen.
Start hat am frühen Sonntagmorgen eine europäische Ariane-Rakete den mexikanischen Satelliten SatMex 5 ins All gebracht. Es war der 10. erfolgreiche Ariane-Start in diesem Jahr. Die insgesamt 114. Mission musste wegen technischer Probleme mit dem Fernmeldesatelliten um 24 Stunden verschoben werden.
Hitzewelle im Dezember, frühlingshafte, gar sommerliche Temperaturen in den USA. Da macht selbst der Weihnachtsmann Pause von der Kälte und fährt eine Runde Wasserski auf dem Sumbrasee im Bundesstaat Minnesota. Temperaturen zwischen 15 und 25 Grad nicht nur in Florida, da rückt Weihnachten zumindest gefühlsmäßig in weite Ferne.
It is the first construction site of its kind. You might say it's out of this world. The International Space Station should start taking shape in about 30 minutes when NASA astronauts begin an orbital assembly job. CNN's Tony Clark is at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Tony?
Gene, it is going very smoothly. In fact, if we go to a graphic that Mission Control has right now, you can see the shuttle Endeavour is closing down from right above the Zarya space module. It has been closing for the last 30 minutes or so. In fact, just a short time ago, we were able to actually see video of Zarya in space while the shuttle was still about 400 feet away. You know, for the past couple of days, ever since it was launched, the shuttle has been chasing after Zarya. This rendezvous started earlier this afternoon as it moved closer and closer. At times at about 5 miles an hour has been the most recent times. And then, in fact, now it's only moving, the shuttle is only moving at about half a mile an hour. It is moving very slowly, closing in on the shuttle, or rather on the space module, Zarya. In fact, the easiest way to see how this rendezvous has worked is a NASA animation. First, the Zarya module has been in an orbit since the last month. It was put into orbit last month, and the shuttle has been chasing it. Then Commander Bob Cabana has taken the shuttle and done a kind of a half circle around it, coming in on top of the module and then lowering down, and he will lower down to about within 10 feet of Zarya. At that point, Nancy Curry will use the shuttle's remote manipulator arm to grapple Zarya and then move it closer to within 4 inches of the Unity module, which is standing upright in the shuttle's payload bay. That grapple still about an hour or so away. The grapple to be done over the Soviet Union so that ground controllers there can monitor the grappling unit. And then later tonight, it will all be hooked together if all goes well. Gene?
Thank you, Tony. The U.S. and Russia, once again, partners in space. Lori?
Standing perpendicular in the Space Shuttle Endeavour. Over the next 90 minutes, she will be moving it down, and it is, again, a particularly difficult maneuver because the position of Zarya is such that it cannot be seen, and so there are a number of dots both on Zarya and on the Unity module. Those dots are put into a computer program that gives her a position of both of those modules so that they can be brought together for the docking process. Once again, the docking will be done when the shuttle is over Russia and the Russian ground control station so that they can be monitoring it as well. So, Brian, what we have seen has been a first major step in the construction of an international space station, and we've been able to watch it as it happened. Brian?
Tony, if these can be compared to, let's say, Lego blocks, how big are these two pieces that will eventually form the nucleus of the space station?
These are initially small compared to the whole station itself, but this is in fact a first. This grapple is the first time the shuttle has grappled something quite this large. The Zarya unit is, I believe, around 42,000 pounds, about 21 tons, and it's larger than any mass that the shuttle arm has ever grappled before. And when they stand in the payload bay, when they are docked, they will be a length of about 77 feet from tip to tip. And so this is a long unit, but these are initially just the first two building blocks in what will be a space station that is expected to be about 2 football fields long.
Tony, quickly bring us up to date. I understand there will be 5 more flights next year. When do the first live-in astronauts arrive?
Well, there are 5 more flights next year. In fact, there are going to be about 42 more flights in all before the station is completed in about the year 2004. But by January the year 2000, the first 3-member international crew will begin living and working on the station, and it will in fact become an international space station.
All right, thank you for taking the time. That is CNN's Tony Clark from the Johnson Space Center in Texas. And now we'll rejoin our regular scheduled programming.
In the news on the world today, President Clinton returns to the White House to learn how much time his attorneys will have to make their case against impeachment. And hundreds of miles above the Earth, the Space Shuttle Endeavour's robot grabs Russia's Zarya module, bringing it closer to rendezvous.
From CNN Center in Atlanta, this is The World Today with Lori Dew.
The Zarya module will soon be hooked up with the Space Shuttle Endeavour, more than 200 miles in space. Right now, the shuttle crew is using its robot arm to grab Zarya. CNN's Tony Clark joins us from Johnson Space Center in Texas with the latest. Hi, Tony.
Hi, Lori. In fact, everything has simply gone like clockwork. The shuttle moved in very close, within just about 10 feet of the Zarya module, the power and propulsion module that was made in Russia. And they got the remote manipulator arm. And we were able to see, because of a camera on Zarya, we were able to see as Nancy Curry, the astronaut, slowly moved in the arm towards the grapple fixture. And she did it to perfection. We were able to hear, in fact, as the grapple was made.
We have Zarya firmly attached to the orbiter. We're halfway home for the day.
A lot of people exhaling down here. That's great. And we had a terrific view from Zarya watching Nancy's great work.
And in fact, right now, what is being done is Curry is still using the remote manipulator arm to lift Zarya, and she's lifting it so that it is above the Unity module. In fact, if we go to some video that is on NASA Select right now, you can see an animation that shows how she is using the remote arm to lift it, and she will bring the docking ports together. She'll bring them within about 4 inches of each other and then relax the arm. At that point, Commander Bob Cabana will fire the jets on board the Shuttle Endeavour, and that should dock the two units together. It will be a difficult maneuver because the position of the two units make it impossible for them to see exactly where they are. But with the kind of precision that we've seen all day long, it's something that we expect to happen in about an hour, 90 minutes or so from now. Lori?
Tony, just how difficult is this operation, so to speak?
Well, it's really very difficult because it's a blind rendezvous in many respects. When Zarya was first brought in towards the shuttle, it was behind the shuttle. It was in a position that the Commander Cabana could not see. And in fact, the use of the remote manipulator arm to grapple it and then to move it over into a docking position are again in blind positions. And so what they've had to do is use a system of dots. Those dots are seen by TV cameras around the shuttle, put into a computer program, and that way Nancy Curry is able to tell the position of the two modules without ever seeing exactly where they are. That is a first for the shuttle.
This is all very fascinating. CNN's Tony Clark at the Johnson Space Center in Texas. Thanks a lot for that update.
Hier die ersten beiden Module der Alpha-Raumstation. Eine neue Woche beginnt. Es ist Montag und kurz nach 6 Uhr. Schönen guten Morgen und herzlich willkommen bei Punkt 6. Die Astronauten der US-Raumfähre Endeavour haben in der Nacht das schwierigste Manöver ihrer Mission geschafft. Sie dockten die ersten beiden Bauteile der internationalen Raumstation ISS aneinander. Damit ist der Grundstein für die größte Allbaustelle der Raumfahrtgeschichte gelegt. Stefan Katzenberger mit den Einzelheiten.
Um kurz nach 3 in der Nacht funkte die Endeavour-Crew ihre Erfolgsmeldung zur Bodenstation. Houston, wir haben Zarya gekapert. In nervenaufreibender Präzisionsarbeit hatte Astronautin Nancy Curry das amerikanische Modul Unity an das russische Bauteil Zarya angekoppelt. Mit dem Greifarm der Endeavour hielt sie Zarya im Abstand von 15 cm zur Unity fest. Gleichzeitig wurde das Shuttle mit Hilfe der Steuerdüsen Millimeter für Millimeter angehoben, bis die Verbindungsschlösser einschnappten. Mehr als 2 Stunden dauerte das Manöver, 340 Kilometer über der Erde, Zeit genug für ein paar Erinnerungsfotos. Noch sind die beiden Bauteile aber nicht fest montiert. Im Lauf der Woche verlassen 2 Endeavour-Astronauten 3-mal das Shuttle, um Zarya und Unity endgültig zu verschrauben und Kabel zu legen. Das russische Modul Zarya dient als Kraftwerk für die Raumstation. Das jetzt angelieferte US-Bauteil Unity ist das zentrale Verbindungsstück für die verschiedenen Labors der ISS. Mehr als 100 Bauteile werden in den nächsten 5 Jahren mit rund 40 Shuttle und Raketenstart ins All geschossen und zusammengebaut. Am Ende ist die fliegende Astronautenherberge dann mehr als 100 Meter lang und 450 Tonnen schwer.
Die Astronauten wollen noch 3 weitere Weltraumspaziergänge unternehmen. Dabei sollen die beiden Module fixiert und Kabel und Leitungen gelegt werden. Im kommenden Sommer soll dann ein 3. Modul ins All geschossen werden.
Astronauts aboard the U.S. Space Shuttle Endeavour are preparing for a spacewalk later today. Their mission will be to connect cables between the first 2 components of an international space station. That construction project began to take shape overnight. Shuttle astronauts, working some 385 kilometers above the Earth, used a robot arm to capture a Russian-built module. Then they attached it to the US-built Unity probe. These were the first of more than 100 parts to be added to the space station over the next 5 years. The station, one of the most ambitious engineering feats undertaken, is scheduled to be completed by the year 2004.
Dann begann das eigentliche Rendezvous-Manöver. Immer wieder wurden die Triebwerke der Endeavour gezündet, bis die Fähre nur noch wenige Meter von der russischen Zarya entfernt war. Nur mit Hilfe der Computeranimation näherten sich die Astronauten ihrem Ziel, ein blinder Anflug, der zum ersten Mal geflogen wurde. Als das russische Modul endlich am Roboterarm hing, funkten die Astronauten nur: Wir haben Zarya geschnappt.
Houston Endeavour, we have capture of Zarya.
2 Stunden später dann die Bilder, auf die die Raumfahrtexperten seit langem gewartet haben. Mit einem kurzen Ruck hakte sich Zarya in das amerikanische Modul ein. Die beiden ersten Bausteine für die internationale Raumstation waren zusammengefügt. Für die Astronauten geht die Arbeit heute weiter. In der kommenden Nacht werden 2 die Raumfähre verlassen, um die elektrischen Verbindungen zwischen dem russischen und dem amerikanischen Teil der internationalen Raumstation zu installieren.
The Russian-built Zarya power and propulsion module, which was placed into orbit last month, was ready and waiting as the shuttle Endeavour closed in.
This view as Endeavour crosses almost directly in front of Zarya's direction of travel.
Slowly, Commander Bob Cabana lowered the shuttle to within 10 feet of Zarya. Then astronaut Nancy Curry used the robot arm to reach out and grab the module.
Houston Endeavour, we have Zarya firmly attached to the orbiter. We're halfway home for the day.
A lot of people exhaling down here. That's great, and we had a terrific view from Zarya watching Nancy's great work.
Weighing 21 tons, Zarya is the most massive object ever grappled using the robot arm. The docking maneuver was made even more difficult because Endeavour's crew could not directly see Zarya. Their view out the window was blocked by the Unity space station module standing upright in the payload bay. Instead, Curry used a series of dots and sophisticated computer program to determine the position of each module.
By placing small dots at various positions on the node, and then by taking a look at those dots with a camera, which we'll have in the payload bay, and then you run that through a computer program. And the computer program says to itself, well, if the dots are at this point on the screen, then the node must be about here. So once we know where the node is, then we'll do the same thing with Zarya.
Once the modules were aligned within 4 inches of each other, Endeavour's engines were fired, locking the 2 space station components together.
Houston Endeavour, we have capture of Zarya.
We copy. Congratulations to the crew of the good ship Endeavour. That's terrific.
An alignment problem with the locking mechanism between the 2 modules caused a momentary snag, but it was worked out, and the 2 space station components were secured.
Nice work, Jerry. And for the commander, your go for attitude control.
The next step is for astronauts Jerry Ross and Jim Newman to put on their spacesuits and begin connecting the cables and antennas that will make this fledgling space station operable. The first of 3 planned spacewalks is scheduled to begin Monday afternoon. Tony Clark, CNN, Johnson Space Center.
Der erste Schritt zur Montage der internationalen Raumstation ist gelungen. Die Astronauten des US-Shuttle Endeavour koppelten in der Nacht ein amerikanisches Bauteil an ein russisches Modul an. Das Manöver musste ohne Sichtkontakt durchgeführt werden.
With the Unity module of the International Space Station in place, Mission Control in Houston awoke the astronauts on the Space Shuttle Endeavour Sunday morning to conclude their chase of the Zarya control module with a thought suggested by Commander Bob Cabana's daughter.
Somewhere
skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true.
Endeavour, Houston, good morning, and that long-distance dedication was to Bob from Sarah.
Well, dreams certainly do come true, Beamer, for all those that are persistent and keep the faith. It is going to be a great day.
Cabana and his crewmates moved right into their rendezvous operations, and he reported to spacecraft communicator Chris Hadfield early Sunday afternoon a successful terminal initiation burn of Endeavour's thrusters to close the final few miles to Zarya.
Houston Endeavour, we see an excellent TI burn, no trim required.
We concur. You are on an intercept with Zarya.
Over the next orbit, Cabana and pilot Rick Sturko flew Endeavour to within a few hundred feet of Zarya. Once he reached a point 250 feet above the Russian-built module, Cabana began slowly flying his ship down toward the 22-ton spacecraft, as mission specialist Nancy Curry prepared the shuttle's robot arm for the job of grappling Zarya from free flight. With everything in place, as they flew 240 miles above Central Asia, Curry moved in and completed the grapple, which Cabana reported to Mission Control.
Houston Endeavour, we have Zarya firmly attached to the orbiter. We're halfway home for the day.
A lot of people exhaling down here. That's great, and we had a terrific view from Zarya watching Nancy's great work.
Curry's next task was to slowly and carefully move Zarya to a position above the pressurized mating adapter mounted to the aft end of Unity, an area that is not in the direct view of the astronauts' eyes or their cameras. To assist in that operation, the shuttle's cameras were trained on the circular targets on both modules. The orbiter's space vision system translated those images into a graphical display of the relative positions of the modules, so Curry could precisely align the two docking surfaces. The astronauts worked closely with flight controllers in Houston to ensure that the two massive pieces of hardware were ready. Then Cabana fired thrusters on the shuttle to push Unity into the docking mechanism of Zarya and mate the first two pieces of the International Space Station.
Houston Endeavour, we have capture of Zarya.
We copy. Congratulations to the crew of the good ship Endeavour. That's terrific.
The next step, retract the pressurized mating adapter's docking ring to bring the surfaces of the two modules together. But as mission specialist Jerry Ross did so, flight controllers noticed a misalignment of the two modules. He was directed to re-extend the ring and repeat the procedure twice. Each effort produced the same result. After more study of the matter by the flight control teams, Hadfield and Ross, who were crewmates on the 1995 shuttle mission that delivered the docking module to the Mir space station, discussed Mission Control's recommendation for action.
We think the culprit, Jerry, is arm drag. Just the friction, even though we're in test mode, just the drag out of each joint being pushed, even in test mode, is enough. Speaking with Moscow and looking at the signature, which is a steadily ramping increase as if it was a steady drag like that. It's not anything sudden, as if it were a jam. So what we'd like you to do is ungrapple, since we have a good capture.
Okay, we copy that, and that's what I was trying to talk them into doing, Chris. Thanks.
And Jerry, looking back at 74, there was a similar effect on 74, although we don't have any quantification of it here. So that's one more item in our discussion.
Okay, copy. I know we got a lot different arm configuration here, but I can tell you from on STS-87, when the arm was in limp mode, it's certainly not limp when I tried to move it with EVA hands.
As soon as Curry released the robot arm's grip on Zarya, the astronauts and the ground control teams saw the two modules move into proper alignment. Ross then retracted the docking ring fully, completing the hard mate of Zarya to Unity. Curry's next task was to use the cameras on the robot arm to survey Zarya, which has been in space since its launch from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan November 20th. Of particular interest, one of two antennas for Zarya's backup docking system, which did not deploy during the module's activation 2 weeks ago. These pictures will be used by station officials to decide what action, if any, is required. Wrapping up a busy day on orbit, Sturco and mission specialist Sergei Krikalev joined Ross and his fellow spacewalker Jim Newman in preparing the tools Ross and Newman will use during the spacewalk that's scheduled to begin Monday afternoon, in which they are to make dozens of power and data cable connections between the first two elements of the International Space Station.
Charlotte, the crew is well underway getting ready for the spacewalk that's set to begin in just about half an hour. Right now, Jerry Ross and Jim Newman are in their spacesuits, and they are doing what is called pre-breathing. They're breathing pure oxygen so that they can get ready for the change in pressure when they go outside in the spacesuits' pressure. Just a short time ago, we saw a scene from one of the shuttle's payload bay cameras, and it was just at a time when Nancy Curry, one of the astronauts, was getting ready to power up the shuttle's robot arm. That will be used to lift Ross to various portions of the space station to get him to various heights, because you know that space station tower is almost like a 7-story building. The astronauts were awakened around noon Eastern time today, and they quickly got ready for work. Endeavour's astronauts were awakened around 12:30 Eastern time this afternoon and are preparing for a busy day of space station construction.
Endeavour, top of the morning to you.
With the first two components of the space station locked together and standing like a 7-story building in the shuttle's payload bay, the next step is to join the two systems electronically during the first of 3 spacewalks.
You can see Jerry and Jim doing their...
Jerry Ross and Jim Newman will spend 6 hours outside the shuttle connecting a series of cables between the two modules.
It's some jumper cables and some plugs that we'll be putting on to various different connector points on the outside of the node. And Jim will be disconnecting the cables that have been launched in place on the outside of the node.
The astronauts have spent hours practicing the maneuvers in NASA's water tank, which simulates the weightlessness of space. Ross says his biggest concern is that the cables are connected properly.
I think the trickiest part that we've got is to make sure that we have very carefully inspected both mating halves of each connector to make sure there's no debris that was shaken loose during launch and has lodged itself in the pins or the sockets.
The spacewalkers say their job is not so much physically demanding as it is time-consuming. NASA ground controllers call it perhaps the most complicated spacewalk ever attempted. Again, the astronauts are in their spacesuits. They are doing what is called pre-breathing pure oxygen to get them ready for going out for the spacewalk. By pre-breathing the pure oxygen, it prevents them from getting what is commonly known as the bends. They will be leaving the shuttle's hatch at just a little less than half an hour from now. The spacewalk itself set to last about 6.5 hours. Charlotte?
Tony, you mentioned there in your report that this is being said to be one of the most dangerous spacewalks ever undertaken. What are some of the risks, and how have they prepared for those potential dangers?
Well, I'm not sure about danger as so much as complex, and it's because there are so many cables that have to be connected, so many tasks that have to be performed. There are some 40 umbilical cables that have to be connected, and they have to be moved. Astronaut Jerry Ross will be working near the top of the Zarya module, or high up on the Zarya module, standing on the end of the robot arm. And so it's simply a very difficult and very time-consuming task. But it is also one that these astronauts have choreographed. They have rehearsed time and time again, and so we expect everything to go smoothly.
CNN's Tony Clark at the Johnson Space Center in Texas. Thanks for joining us. Now,
U.S. Space Shuttle Endeavour are getting ready to electronically link elements of the International Space Station. These are live pictures here that you see. Earlier, there was a spacewalk that lasted about 6 hours. They're going to be connecting power cables between the Russian and U.S.-made sections of this space station.
A tale of two leaders. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu buys some time in keeping his government together as Middle East violence continues unabated. In the United States, President Clinton's lawyers prepare the defense in impeachment hearings. And later, Russian-American unity in space.
Eine wichtige Hürde ist überwunden, denn von nun an werden alle weiteren Elemente der Raumstation nach demselben Muster angekoppelt. Aber der gefährliche Teil kommt noch. Ihn haben die Astronauten vorher unter Wasser geübt. Heute Nacht werden Jerry Ross und Jim Newman 6 Versorgungskabel zwischen den beiden Modulen verbinden. Kurz danach ist der Rohbau zumindest arbeitsfähig. Dann geben wir das Okay, damit das russische Kontrollzentrum in Moskau den Strom für den amerikanischen Teil anschaltet. Bis zum Jahr 2003 werden Weltraumhandwerker zu tun haben, bis er fertig ist. Der größte Außenposten der Menschheit im All.
You are seeing live pictures from the Space Shuttle Endeavour. This is the way it looks as astronauts continue construction on the first parts of an international space station. CNN's Tony Clark joins us from the Johnson Space Center in Texas with more on this mission, which includes one of the most complicated spacewalks ever attempted. Tony?
Judy, in fact, this is the first of what will be 3 spacewalks done by Jim Newman and Jerry Ross, the 2 spacewalking astronauts. And both of them say that of the 3, this is the most complicated. It is about a 6.5-hour spacewalk to connect the umbilicals between the new space station modules. And right now, what you're seeing is Ross and Newman. You're seeing Newman floating in the background, and Ross is on the end of the shuttle's robot arm. And what they are doing now is getting set up for getting all the tools set up, getting the tethers. This is a view from the camera that is on the remote arm, and you'll see Jim Newman down there at the very bottom working to set everything up. David Wolf is an astronaut who is joining me right now. They're going through the procedures themselves. They haven't actually started connecting anything on board the space station.
That's right, Tony. It's a fairly extensive job just getting all the tools laid out, the foot restraints to help you stay in position, essentially staging for the whole operation.
One of the things that we've been seeing, they're working in gloves like you have there. How difficult is it to operate, manipulate? Because you've got one of the tethers there, one of the key first items that has to be set up.
Of course, it's pretty important. This end is attached to the spacecraft, the slide wires, and you have to work it with the glove. Of course, you don't want it to come open too easy. And this end to the astronaut. And this is your tether reel. This glove is blown up with 4 or 5 pounds of pressure. That's enough to make it very hard to move and quite a bit of stress on your forearm.
And setting up the tethers is an important first step for the astronauts, anyone that steps out in the payload bay.
That's right. We don't want to get loose.
And is that a real concern for the astronauts, the possibility of that?
I would say it's the #1 concern. All our training centers on not coming loose, but of course the job is to get the space station constructed, all the power and data cables connected. But we keep that #1 in our mind.
Right now we see Jerry Ross. There's a good shot of Jerry Ross on the end of the shuttle's robot arm. How difficult is it for essentially the choreographing between Nancy Curry, who is operating the arm, and Jerry to get him in the right place?
That's right. This is really choreographed between people on the ground, Nancy Curry running the robot arm, Rick inside with the checklist, and both of the 2 crew members outside doing a very careful choreograph of connecting cables, both power and data, motion, precision, to the inch motion. Nancy Curry uses all her helicopter piloting skill from the Army to do very precise movements of that arm, just as she used when docking the components.
One of the things we see if we look at Jerry Ross on the end of the arm is there is a stand in front of him with a lot of what appears to be equipment in front. What is that?
That's right. That's a tool stanchion. And instead of going back and forth to the airlock and bringing all the various tools he will need to conduct the rest of this spacewalk, we take them with us as we go around, and that's essentially your work site, portable work site.
Now, he is tethered, I assume, to the arm itself, to that stanchion there?
That's right. He has transferred tethers. He first came out onto the shuttle slide wire, then switched over to a tether on the arm.
And then Jim Newman is off on the right-hand side of the screen. What does it appear he's doing?
Jim Newman is preparing his work site, bringing equipment to where he will need it on the pressurized mating adapter where he has just gone to this moment. That's the adapter between the space shuttle and the Unity node above in the top of the screen.
And I think if we look at Newman to kind of by his right hand, we see the tether connector. It looks like just like you were showing us.
That's right. That's his tether reel, and he keeps that continually under surveillance for its integrity.
One of the things that the astronauts are doing, the primary function of this spacewalk, is to connect 40 different umbilicals, and you can see the various cables going around, and it is to get Unity and Zarya both operating together, essentially thinking together.
Exactly. Their computers will become one mind. The power will come from the solar arrays on Zarya and flow into Unity. Command will come from a United States Control Center and the Russian Control Center through antennas, which will be installed in the next EVA 2 days from now. We're really seeing a space station come together in front of our eyes.
One of the things that we have seen is the training that they've had in the water tank. How realistic does that show what it's going to be like for them in space?
Typical, Tony, of spaceflight, it takes different simulators to capture all we need. Underwater, we capture the spatial orientation. You can go upside down, but you can't operate the space suit as a spacecraft it is in a vacuum in zero gravity. We go in vacuum chambers, we go in zero gravity airplanes, and it's up to the team and the astronaut to synthesize this all into the event they're doing now in actual spaceflight.
I think for the layman, one of the things that comes immediately to mind, you have astronauts that have been in these space suits for at least the last couple of hours before going out into the payload bay. They will work for another 6.5 hours out there and still be in them when they come back in. How do they eat or drink or have anything just to keep their energy up for working this long?
That's a good point. It's hard work in a spacesuit. It's one of the hardest things an astronaut does. They have a water bag, about 1.5 quarts, 2 quarts of water. They have a candy bar, and they have a conventional diaper.
How dangerous is this kind of work?
Well, spaceflight in general has to be taken seriously. It's unforgiving of small mistakes, and that goes for spacewalking also. It has to be done exactly right.
And so that's why we have we've seen the tethers and everything else. And in fact, one of the things they will be checking out on the third spacewalk is what is called the SAFER system. What is that?
That's right. The SAFER is essentially the aid for rescue, simplified aid for rescue. It's a jetpack that is on the spacesuit. If we should become unattached from the space station, no shuttle present that could maneuver to get us, we can essentially fly ourselves back with a limited amount of propellant or fuel.
And that's something that has been tried before, tested on other flights, but it's being kind of the final test, I guess, this time.
That's right. We've redesigned some valves for higher reliability, and Jerry will be doing a test of that jetpack at the end of this spacewalk. We're also building one to fit the Russian spacesuit. We will operate both Russian and American spacesuits from the space station.
One of the things that some of the astronauts have talked about is that there are often no surprises, or rarely a surprise when they get out there. The training, the lengthy training, tells them to anticipate everything?
I think that we have had our share of surprises, actually, in the business. The training is extensive, but we always have to wonder what we haven't thought of, and that's what comes up to bite us. So we train extensively. We've gotten through them all, though.
David Wolf, thank you very much. Of course, we will be watching the space walk, expected to last a total of 6.5 hours, and so we will keep you updated. Judy?
All right. Tony Clark, Dave Wolf, thank you both. You know, looking at that panoramic background, they could be anywhere, but when you see the background, it's the planet Earth, you're reminded of just where they are. Worldview will be right back.
If you could click back up again. Okay, next for you, Jim, is to install your DTM cover. Okay.
long commute, but they're finally at the job site now. They're floating high above us. Jerry Ross and Jim Newman, those astronauts, are busy connecting electrical power cables between the first two modules of the International Space Station. And the good news, of course, is if they do drop a tool, it won't go very far. Tony Clark is at the Houston Johnson Space Center. He's been following what is, I'm sure, the most watched construction site anywhere at any time. Tony, tell us about it.
Well, you know, Lou, they are some 242 miles above Earth. In fact, right now they're above the southern tip of South America, doing their work, helping build an international space station. What you're seeing right now is the remote manipulator arm, the robot arm, and there at the very end is Jerry Ross. And what you can see on the right-hand side is essentially his workstation. It is a pole, a stanchion with a series of tools that he will use to try and connect some 40 umbilicals between the U.S.-built and the Russian-built space station modules. This is about a 6.5-hour-long spacewalk that's planned. It is packed with work because what they have to do, he and Jim Newman, who is the other spacewalking astronaut, have to disconnect a variety of cables that were secured during launch and then connect them to the proper points so that they can get these modules operating.
Tony, how long have they been out there now?
It's not quite 2 hours, but you know, the first part of their work is simply setting up the tools, getting the tethers, getting them tied down correctly so that they don't drift away. What we're seeing now are some shots of some of the connectors. At the bottom was the, right now at the top is the Unity module, the American-built Unity module. And we've seen some of the preparations for work. Nancy Curry operates that remote arm, and she tries to move Ross to the proper position so that he can begin connecting the variety of cables. It is slow work, but you know, the view, if he ever gets a chance to look around, has got to be tremendous up there, Lou.
Tremendous. And will there be any other effort required, any other project, the electrical, they're playing, if you will, electrician on this particular spacewalk. Will they have to do any more in connecting these modules?
There are 3 spacewalks in all that are planned over this mission. This is the one that is devoted to connecting the umbilicals, getting the computers running so they can turn on the space station nodes. And because there are so many, they say that they've got to get them simply one right after the other quickly. Their biggest concern is that some of the pins in the connectors may be bent by debris. And so Jerry Ross has said that he's got to check both ends of those very carefully before he tries to connect them so he doesn't break off a connector. The closest hardware store is quite a ways away.
Tony, thank you very much. Tony Clark reporting from the Houston, from the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Again, terrific pictures coming to us from the Endeavour as Jerry Ross and Jim Newman put together the first 2 components of the International Space Station.
In der Raumfähre Endeavour haben in der Nacht einen Weltraumspaziergang gemacht. 6,5 Stunden lang verkabelten sie die beiden ersten Module der Internationalen Raumstation. Beide Teile waren gestern aneinander gekoppelt worden. Insgesamt mussten die Astronauten 40 Strippen ziehen. Obwohl die Kabel wegen der Kälte schnell steif wurden, gingen die Arbeiten schneller als geplant voran.
Bis in die frühen Morgenstunden haben 2 Astronauten der US-Raumfähre Endeavour die ersten beiden Teile der Internationalen Raumstation ISS mit Kabeln verbunden. Ross und Newman waren etwa 4 Stunden damit beschäftigt, ganz ohne Hilfsgerät 40 Elektro- und Kommunikationskabel zu montieren. Damit blieben sie deutlich unter der vorgegebenen Zeit von mehr als 6 Stunden. Die Aufgabe galt als eine der schwierigsten, die je im All unternommen worden ist. 2,5 Jahre lang hatte die Besatzung für den Einsatz in der Schwerelosigkeit trainiert.
During a 4-hour spacewalk, they connected the power cables between the Russian and US-made sections of the station. The astronauts finished the complicated task ahead of schedule. Officials from the US space agency NASA are calling this first extravehicular activity, or EVA, a success.
Although we have a lot of challenges ahead of us and additional EVAs, tonight is a good indication of our training, our readiness, and our capability to meet the EVA challenge that we face during the forthcoming 5 years of assembly of the space station.
One of the astronauts rode on Endeavour's robotic arm to connect the cables. A mission specialist operated the device from inside the shuttle. About 75 spacewalks will be required during the 5-year construction of the space station.
Bei einem schwierigen Weltraumspaziergang in 380 Kilometern Höhe verbanden sie die ersten beiden Teile der internationalen Station, die gestern zusammengekoppelt worden waren. Die Astronauten schafften es in nur 4,5 Stunden, 40 Verbindungen zusammenzustecken. Das erste Teil der Raumstation war vor 3 Wochen ins All geschossen worden.
As Monday morning marked a new work week on the ground, it also marked the start of a new phase of activity for the astronauts on the Space Shuttle Endeavour. The start of a series of spacewalks to complete connections between the first 2 modules of the International Space Station. One day after operating the shuttle's robot arm, first to grapple the Zarya control module from free flight and then to mate it to the Unity connecting node, mission specialist Nancy Curry again powered up the arm for a day's work of moving spacewalking construction workers to their job sites. Astronauts Jerry Ross and Jim Newman began the first of 3 scheduled spacewalks for the mission about 20 minutes early on Monday afternoon, exiting Endeavour's airlock with the station towering above them on the orbiter docking system. With pilot Rick Sturko coordinating the activity from inside the shuttle, Ross and Newman began by setting up some of the variety of tools they would use for the day's activities, and they installed a foot restraint and tool rack on the end of the robot arm. The primary task for the day was the connection of some 40 power and data cables to permit power generated from Zarya to activate the systems on board Unity. So while Ross removed dust covers from the connectors on some umbilicals, Newman released other cables from their launch positions on the pressurized mating adapter. Then the spacewalkers connected the cables leading from PMA number 2 to Unity, a set of 4 primary connections and another set of 4 backup links. The next step was installation of a slide wire on the side of Unity to facilitate movement of the astronauts from one end of the module to the other. Then the spacewalkers repeated the umbilical connection task, this time attaching 16 cables from pressurized mating adapter number 1 to the other end of Unity. Once Unity and both PMAs were all connected, Ross and Newman moved on to plug in the last 6 umbilicals, a set of 3 primary and a set of 3 backup cables to carry power from Zarya to Unity. Since they'd begun work early and had not encountered any difficulties along the way, Ross and Newman found themselves well ahead of schedule, so they switched places. Newman stepped into the foot restraint on the robot arm and started installing handrails to the exterior of Unity, a task originally planned for the second spacewalk. As they did that work Monday evening, flying some 240 miles above Russian ground stations, Zarya flight controllers at the Russian Mission Control Center in Koryalov sent commands to activate the 2 Russian-American power converters, sending power from the Russian-built module to the American-built one. Commander Bob Cabana confirmed to spacecraft communicator Mike Gernhardt that both modules were active.
And Houston Endeavour, we have a good connection with good data.
We copy.
And since they were still ahead of the planned timeline, Curry moved Newman on the end of the robot arm to take a close look at the 2 antennas for Zarya's backup docking system, which did not deploy as planned during the module's activation last month.
Okay. This one's a little bit different, although it's in principle the same. The pin is pulled all the way out. It looks like it's been fully released. It simply hasn't come up as much.
In the meantime, Ross removed thermal covers from the 2 command routing computers mounted to the exterior of Unity's PMA number 1, completing the last of the scheduled tasks for this spacewalk. Cabana reported to Mission Control.
Houston Endeavour, we are complete with step 26. We have successfully activated the space station with no anomalies. The software worked perfect.
We copy, Bob. That's really great news. Outstanding effort.
The day's work done outside the shuttle, as Ross and Newman cleaned up the payload bay late Monday night, Gernhardt informed Ross that he had just set an American spacewalking record.
Endeavour Houston for EVA. Just a note of interest, Jerry Ross has now exceeded Tom Akers' accumulated EVA time of 29 hours and 41 minutes. Congratulations.
Thanks, Mike.
A short time later, both Ross and Newman returned inside the airlock to conclude a 7-hour and 21-minute spacewalk, the first of 3 planned to complete setup and activation of the first 2 modules of the International Space Station.